In this video, I have attempted to capture, using photos and memories to guide me, what those glorious distant summers in Quetico Park were like, and to recall people and events to the best of my ability. The photo on the left is from not long after we flew into Beaver House Lake in 1978, when Leaf was just over 3 months old. The image on the right is of Marie and Anna on their way to work in the garden in Cache Bay in 1982. The first park rangers in Quetico were all men. They worked year-round. They built most of their own cabins that were scattered around the park, a day's snowshoe between them. Quetico was first set aside in 1909 as a wildlife and timber preserve. The rangers, therefore, were primarily concerned with stopping poaching. This photo is of Robert Redman, the first park ranger, and he is camped on Eden Island in Quetico Lake in 1909. A few decades later, when recreational canoeists started to increase, married couples were hired to run some of the ranger stations in locations, primarily on Basswood Lake, that had large numbers of canoeists. Some of the couples, like Bob Halliday and his wife Evelyn, were examples of couples with young children. Marie and I were hired in 1976 and were soon followed by Glenn and Carrie Nolan and Janice Manichuk and Peter Puttycombe as park rangers who also had young children. Joan Viramini and Mike and Pris O'Brien are two of many examples of rangers with older children. Marie and I were far from being unique. We were simply carrying on a long-held tradition. Marie and I were park rangers at a time when the park was in the midst of major changes, changes that would greatly alter the purpose and the intent of Quetico Park. The Quetico Provincial Park Advisory Committee had been appointed in 1971. Their purpose was to determine the future of Quetico Park, and they received thousands of letters and well over 100 oral presentations. The vast majority were in favor of stopping logging in the park. When we began working as park rangers in 1976, logging had been banned. In 1978, Quetico was declared a wilderness park. To facilitate this transition, a quota system, a cannon bottle ban, limits on the number of people on a campsite, and other restrictions were enacted. It quickly became apparent that we were working with an all-star cast of naturalists, historians, and administrators. We felt that we were in Quetico's golden age. This video is an attempt to capture the spirit of a time when Quetico was evolving into a wilderness park. Atikokan began as a railroad stop, started growing rapidly in the 1950s after iron ore was discovered just north of town, and a wood-powered hydro plant helped keep the town alive when the iron ore mines closed. During all these changes, logging and tourism, primarily fishing camps and canoeists, were the stable backbone of the town. From the time we arrived in Atikokan, I was struck by the diversity, primarily due to people coming to work in the mines, not just from Canada, but from around the world. As expected, there were outdoor enthusiasts of all kinds, but there was, and still is, a large number of painters, as well as many writers, photographers, and musicians. I was, and still am, a firm believer in setting aside wilderness parks, such as Quetico, where nature can function with as little interference as possible. Atikokan and Quetico Park have found that most people can see the purpose and the value of both wilderness and commercial activities, such as logging and mining. That is why I could, in good conscience, work as a park ranger in Quetico in the summer and at the Sipawi sawmill in the winter. Quetico Park is a great place for adult canoeists, but also a great place for children to explore and to grow. It was important to Marie and I that we were part of a wave of couples with young children operating ranger stations, bringing back something the park hadn't seen for a long time. Marie Pelcola was born in Ontonagon, Michigan, and grew up in Winton, Minnesota, on the edge of the Boundary Water Canoe area. I was born in Duluth, Minnesota, and grew up in small towns in North Dakota and Minnesota where my father sold farm machinery for a living. Both Marie and I had what we considered idyllic childhoods, growing up with siblings in loving, active families. Marie wasn't an avid fisherman, but loved to sit on the bow plate when trolling for walleyes or casting for smallmouths. This walleye made a very good supper. I've been a tree hugger for a long, long time. This photo was taken by Marie in the 1970s. Both Marie and I graduated from small liberal arts colleges in Minnesota. We met in 1970 on a river near Ely, Minnesota, when Marie was returning from guiding a trip into Quetico Park for the Outward Bound School near Ely. We were married a year and a half later. I was teaching biology and chemistry in a suburb of St. Paul, Minnesota, and Marie was a legal secretary in St. Paul when we decided to fulfill both our dreams to go somewhere where we could live in a small town and work in a wilderness canoe area. In 1973, there were many jobs available in the Atikokan area, and prices for land and for a small business was much lower than it was in northern Minnesota. We applied for landed immigrant status in Canada, along with another couple we knew. We were accepted, and relatively quickly, with the help of a bank in Atikokan, were able to purchase a very small business with cabins, gas pumps, and minnows east of Atikokan. After 2 years of running the resort, we all decided to sell the resort and find jobs in the area where we could have more personal time to spend exploring the surrounding area. After selling the resort, Marie and I spent a lot of time looking for permanent outdoor work near Atikokan. One evening, we went to the pub at the Atikokan Hotel with some friends. Near the end of a very pleasant evening, we found out that there was an opening for jobs as Quetico Park Rangers. These jobs seldom came open, and we immediately decided to apply. Since Marie had guided extensively in Quetico, she had a strong background for the job. I, on the other hand, had much less Quetico Park canoeing experience in my background. My main attribute was that I was married to Marie. We were still landed immigrants, and we hadn't been in Canada long enough to apply for citizenship. In addition, I had recently discovered that I was a type 1 diabetic. We were hopeful, but I felt we had, at the very best, an outside chance of getting this dream job. Since I don't have any photographs of the looks on our faces as we waited for days, possibly weeks, to find out if we had gotten our park manager jobs, I am using photos of our two youngest granddaughters. Penny with a puzzled, skeptical look that probably reflects the way I felt, and Kareem's optimistic smile and fist pump, probably reflecting Marie's more hopeful anticipation. Finally, the phone rang. We found to our joy and astonishment that we had been chosen. We were officially park rangers. In these photos, Marin and Luke, our oldest grandchildren, enthusiastically exhibit our satisfaction and delight in being selected. I didn't know what to expect when we flew into Beaver House Lake for the first time. Marie had been through Beaver House while guiding for Outward Bound, but hadn't been to the ranger station. We had spent the previous 2 weeks learning the basics of being park rangers from the park superintendent, Fergie Wilson, and other park personnel. We spent a lot of time learning about office practices, camping permits, fishing licenses, radio usage, maintenance duties of the ranger station, and other topics. It was a wonderful opportunity to get to know and learn from very experienced and knowledgeable park rangers such as Joe and Vera Meany, Wilbur and Bernice Hyatt, and Mike and Priscilla O'Brien. Beaver House Lake was a very busy place from the opening of walleye season in mid-May until the end of June. In 1976, there were no quotas, and up to 10 horsepower motors could be used. Many of the fishermen flew in from Hanburg's resort on Lac La Croix, and a high percentage of them had guides from the Lac La Croix First Nation. Rules changed over the next few summers. A quota system was introduced, a can and bottle ban was put in place, and more restrictive regulations on outboard motors were implemented. And this eventually led to a complete ban on outboard motors. Quetico was on its way to becoming a wilderness park. The amount of traffic through Beaver House dropped significantly in July and remained fairly low even in August, the busiest month of the year at the other ranger stations. During our first 2 summers at Beaver House Lake, we didn't have any children, and Marie had time to identify, with the help of Shan Walsh and Shirley Pruniak, over 100 species of plants around Beaver House Lake. This is Lady Truss's orchid. Marie especially liked finding plants with interesting and unusual flowers, like this buckbean plant, also known as bog bean. Sly Creek is usually visible when flying from Nim Lake to Beaver House Ranger Station. We'd been asked by canoeists if it were possible to paddle up Sly Creek all the way to Sly Lake. Since we didn't know, we decided to leave the ranger station at the 5 o'clock closing time during the long days in late June when fishing customers had slowed down. We were interested in finding out what Sly Creek was like. We paddled a fair distance up the creek when Marie noticed these white flowers with large leaves that she didn't recognize. She photographed them and sent slides to Shan Walsh, who was ecstatic. The plant was floating marsh marigold, a subarctic species that had never been reported previously in Quetico Park. I was fortunate to see and photograph this young wolf near the visitor parking area just outside the park at Beaver House Lake. I also had the opportunity to observe many moose. The numbers are high during our time in the park. I also saw, for short periods of time, weasels, mink, pine marten, otter, white-tailed deer, black bear, and a cinnamon-colored bear that would occasionally visit the ranger station, apparently looking for garbage. I never saw, in any of my time in Quetico, a lynx or a fisher. The backyard at Beaver House was mowed and evidently became a good habitat for mice and voles. We often heard a barred owl hooting in the evening. One evening in early summer, we heard a higher pitched hoot. When we went out to look, we saw an immature barred owl on a cedar branch at the edge of the backyard. In our first 2 summers, Bree and I were able to go on short canoe trips while the other took on the work of running the ranger station. Only one person is paid each day, so this allowed us to discover more about the surrounding area. Marie was fortunate in being able to take a trip to Lac La Croix and back to Beaver House with Shirley Pruniak. It was generally believed that Shirley knew more about the park and its history than everyone else combined. On one of my trips, I found out what a soft life we had at the ranger station when I took a trip with the travel light while paddling like crazy portage crew. We spent our days cleaning campsites and clearing portages of dead trees and other obstacles. From our first summer in Quetico, Right up to our last, Marie and I relied heavily on information we received from conservation officers and portage crew about the conditions of portages, water levels on creeks and rivers, campsites to avoid because of reports of bear activity or sightings, as well as information on wildlife, locations and activities of moose, deer, and wolves. They helped us keep up to date on current conditions in the park so we could pass this information on to canoeists. In early May of 1978, I flew into the Beaver House Ranger Station and Marie drove around to the public landing on Beaver House. She was with our infant son, Leaf. He was just 2 months old. Our lives were changed. We were now a family of three, a new life with new responsibilities. We were so thankful. A healthy, bouncing, and in this case, almost flying baby boy. Both my parents and Marie's came to see us. It was love at first sight for grandparents and grandson. Photo was of my mom and Leaf. Of course, we also had a visit from Marie's parents, and Leaf got to meet his grandpa Huxley and his grandma Evelyn. Here Leaf and Huxley sit on the dock at Beaver House. It was always great to see friends who paddled in to see us. Here Al and Karen Maddox and their two daughters are on the beach in front of the ranger station, and they have all teamed up to build this fabulous sandcastle, complete with a moat. Tom and Bettina Miata were two of the first people we met in Atikokan. They were highly influential and eventually successful in their quest to make Quetico a wilderness park. Kira Miata loved playing in the sand at Beaver House Lake. Her older brother Kenji was probably walking in the woods with his parents looking for mushrooms, moose antlers, or some other treasure. Sometimes we were surprised by who showed up at our dock. This is Mike Barker, the district manager for the Atikokan area and our boss's boss. He was a dedicated canoeist who was on a long trip through Quetico Park that had begun at Nim Lake. That summer we also met Steve Jourdain, chief of the Lac La Croix First Nation, who was also on an extended trip into Quetico Park. This rusted car on the Beaver House Quetico Lake portage was driven to this field that was a logging camp on a logging road that began at the railroad tracks at Flanders and continued on into the park in the 1930s. There was a fish hatchery at the site in the 1940s. Landscapes and people change. The car in the previous image of a car in a field is now hard to find due to the rapidly growing pines and other vegetation. Leaf arrived at Beaver House as a 2-month-old infant and left a year and a half later as a walking, talking young boy with instructions for the pilot as we prepared to take off to return to Nim Lake and then Atikokan. In our first summer, we met Bruce Curtis, a young pilot who flew fishermen from Handberg's resort into and out of Beaver House Lake. The next summer, after hearing about his skills as a pilot and his friendly, outgoing personality, he was hired by the Ministry of Natural Resources. He flew in Quetico for just a few years when he tragically died from leukemia. Not long ago, the Ontario government named a lake just east of Beaver House after him. I had the opportunity to talk to many of the Lac La Croix First Nation guides as they waited for planes to take them and their fishing clients back to Lac La Croix. These discussions and hearing their perspectives, to me new perspectives, on the distant and recent past of Quetico Park, eventually led me to return to school and to learn more about the archaeology of the Quetico Park area. Cache Bay Ranger Station was a big change from Beaver House Lake. The kid-friendly big sand beach with gradually increasing water depth was replaced by a small rocky island with a dock at the bottom of a hill where the water depth dropped off quickly. Just out from the dock, the water was 70 feet deep according to canoeists with depth finders. The cabin was older and somewhat smaller than the one at Beaver House Lake. The cabin was well built, and previous rangers had made it very inviting and attractive. We knew we had to be very strict and watchful with a toddler in the family. There was a tire swing and a woodshed with a roof that with some work could be converted into a playhouse. Other changes, such as adding a large sandbox, would be easy to do. Art Madsen and Jock Richardson are thought to be the first two non-native permanent settlers on Saginaw Lake. Art and his wife Dinah were still running the resort on the lake in 1980. The opportunity to meet others, like Justine Kerfoot, Benny Ambrose, Dorothy Powell, and Irv Benson, shown here talking to Shirley Pruniak, played a role in our deciding to leave Beaver House and go to Cache Bay. For some reason, canoeists arrived in waves. Part of the reason for this was due to the weather. Canoeists were often held up, sometimes for a day or more, by high winds and/or violent weather. When the weather improved, winds died down, and we'd often get 2 days' worth of canoes in one morning. This is a family portrait, but Anna has yet to make an appearance. Marie is about 5 months pregnant, holding Leaf, and we would be blessed with a girl named Anna in November. Drawing by John Bouchard. Anna was 5 months old when we flew into Cache Bay. Leaf now had a baby sister to watch over and to play with. Marie and I both found it challenging, watching over two, and we cherished the evening hours after they were both sound asleep. Leaf now has a sister. Here he is telling her about some of the highlights of the outdoor play area as I wheel them around the Cache Bay cabin in a wheelbarrow. Anna liked to go outside first thing in the morning and pick elderberries that grew alongside the cabin. One of her first words was pick. There were some blueberries on the island, so she got good use out of the word pick. We had a lot of visitors at Cache Bay. Some came to see Marie and I, and many came to see Anna and Leaf. Here Gary Parker, a conservation officer and the district manager for the Cache Bay area, plays with Anna while Jennifer Garrett entertains us with her music. The sandbox got a lot of use. Portage crew would join in, and occasionally younger kids canoeing with their parents would play with Leaf and Anna while waiting for their parents to get camping permits and fishing licenses. Leaf and Anna always enjoyed it when Portage crew stopped by for a visit. One of their favorites was Peter Kerr, a young man from Atikokan who went out of his way to spend time with them and to take an interest in what they were doing. We had a small garden plot at Cache Bay, but it was very unproductive. Fortunately, we learned from Art and Dinah Madsen down the lake that growing tomatoes in large buckets and moving them to keep them in the sun was very effective. We were even able to get some ripe tomatoes. Beaver House Lake had a sand beach, and the shallow water warmed up quickly in the spring and remained warm well into the fall. The water around Cache Bay's rocky island dropped off quickly, and in the spring it was icy cold. It remained cold throughout the summer. In spite of this, Leaf and Anna and other children who came to visit would spend long periods of time in the water. When Leaf got older and was a competent swimmer, we allowed him to jump off the dock when one of us was present. There was a table in front of the cabin, and it was a great place to have breakfast in the morning sun. And also, we were sometimes joined by a red squirrel or chipmunks. Leaf and Anna always slept really well in the park. They probably slept even better after Tempest Benson, who grew up on Saginagon's Lake and was the daughter of a woman from Lac La Croix, gave them these dream catchers that she made for them. With a growing family, laundry day became a long, busy day. Leaf and Anna usually played in the porch or helped Marie or me with the laundry while the other parent took care of the office. Bob Graham was one of the Ministry of Natural Resources pilots who flew on park runs, dropping off groceries, library books, and other supplies, and also picking up camping permits and fishing licenses info as well as the money collected. The money was undoubtedly the most important thing collected, and Leaf would loudly declare what he felt was the most important delivered item. When the plane had taken off and circled and flew back over the cabin, he would loudly call out, "Thanks for the bananas." From the Cache Bay Ranger cabin, it was just a short paddle around the corner to Swamp Bay on the way to Otter Track Lake along the border route. I frequently saw moose on early morning excursions in my solo canoe. Inspired by the research on the significance of moose antlers in attracting cow moose, I made a lightweight pair of antlers out of cardboard and would strap them to my head when in a good location for calling moose on the Canadian side of Swamp Bay. I managed a photo of a mid-sized bull one morning. After calling him down to the edge of the lake, he just gave me, sitting with my antler hat in the canoe, a very brief, dismissive look and ambled off. My dad and Leaf both liked to fish, and they especially liked fishing together. These bass became part of our supper. This slide brings back unpleasant memories. The summer after this photo was taken, I took my mother for a short canoe ride. She complained of feeling woozy not long into the trip. We immediately came back to the ranger station and called the Gunflint Trail Volunteer Fire Department, we had previously been told to contact if an American citizen had a medical emergency. They quickly arrived and got her down the lake, into an ambulance, and to the Grand Marais Hospital. The hospital determined that she had had a minor heart attack, and she was in the hospital for a week or so. My mom and dad then drove back home to Phoenix, Arizona. We were extremely fortunate that the Gunflint Trail Volunteer Fire Department acted so quickly and that they and the Grand Marais Hospital gave her such excellent care. The porch at Cache Bay was a great place to play with Legos. On this rainy day, it was a comfortable place for Sandra Hansen, a friend from Eau Claire, Wisconsin, to read to three of her boys and Leaf. Our friend Jennifer was a dedicated and talented painter. Here she is giving Leaf some tips on painting landscapes. Jennifer made this painting of the sun coming up over Cache Point while sitting at a table in front of the cabin. We had our share of canoe-related emergencies during our 5 summers at Cache Bay. There were a couple of drownings in the falls chain, and a person was killed when lightning struck a tree next to his tent. We had a few routine cases of swamp canoes and one serious incident of two canoes swamping on an exceptionally windy day. Shirley Pruniak had come to Cache Bay, and we decided to leave early one morning. Forecast was for wind and rain later in the day, to interview Art and Dinah Madsen, and Irv and Tempest Benson. Later that day, Bill Douglas was concerned about some of his customers, and the winds were getting stronger. When he rounded American Point, he saw flashes of aluminum in the open stretch towards Cache Point. He was able to rescue the four canoeists in his big towboat and immediately headed to Cache Bay Ranger Station, the closest place for help. Marie was at the station with a few stranded canoeists, waiting for the winds to die down, along with our 2-year-old son, Leaf. I was still down the lake with Shirley and unaware of what was happening. Bill and the stranded canoeists got the fireplace going, and 3 of the canoeists were stripped down and crawled into sleeping bags with the 3 hypothermic men to warm them up with body heat. Marie had filled the bathtub with warm water and had Bill and 2 others help lower the man in the worst shape into the water while keeping his limbs out of the water so that the cold water in his extremities wouldn't flow back to the heart and cause arrhythmia or even death. All 4 slowly came around and were drinking tea in front of the fireplace when one man began yelling and had to be held back from crawling into the fire. All ended well. Drawing by John Bouchard. Michael, the oldest son of the couple we moved to Canada with, enjoyed feeding chipmunks on the front step. Leaf treated the sawhorse as an actual horse. He lassoed it over and over and over again, and then would pretend to ride it to the woodshed, seen in the background. The woodshed served as a playhouse, especially on rainy days. The tire swing, already here when we arrived, was put to good use, not just by Leaf and Anna, but also occasionally by Marie and I, and also, quite often, by canoeists. My mother gets the pleasure of reading Goodnight Moon, a book loved by the young and the not so young, to Anna. I built a solo canoe with the help of friends who came to visit. In addition to using it for short solo excursions, we also found it was the best and safest way to take Leaf or Anna on short trips near the island. The canoe is aging gracefully and is still in use. We came across this little falls one evening when out for a paddle and Portage crew were watching the kids. Platinum Falls, our name for it, is in a little cove across from the cabin and not visible from the lake. It is just a trickle under normal conditions, but flows freely after a good rain. We were able to take just 2 short trips with Leaf and Anna, both to Saganagons. Gary Parker and a Portage crew member ran the station for us on those days. We did indeed get to know a lot of interesting people when we were at Cache Bay. In addition to canoeists, we got to know John Bouchard, for 16 years, a gregarious conservation officer in the summer on Saginaw Lake and a trapper, along with his wife Eve, on Northern Light Lake in the winter. John later wrote a book about his experiences on Saginaw Lake. Benny Ambrose, shown here with his daughter Holly, a geologist in Alaska, and her daughter. Benny and his wife Val raised Holly and her sister Bonnie on Otter Track Lake until they reached school age. Benny had homesteaded on Otter Track Lake in the early 1930s and met Val McElhenney in the late 1930s, and they lived on Otter Track Lake year-round in a wooden structure with just a canvas top. Val left with the girls when they reached school age. Benny was alone on Otter Track Lake after that. He was highly respected for his prospecting, trapping, and guiding expertise. Benny Ambrose died in 1982. Prairie Portage is by far the busiest ranger station in Quetico Park. Towboats take canoeists and others paddle from Moose Lake to the Canadian side of Prairie Portage. Towboats also take canoeists back to their destinations on Moose Lake. People using boats and motors use a motorized portage on the Minnesota side of the border. We decided to come to Prairie when the O'Briens retired, partly because we thought it would be interesting to experience a new ranger station, and also because Marie grew up in Winton, and she had lots of friends and relatives in Ely and Winton. They would just be a towboat ride and a short drive away. Prairie Portage has a long and storied history. Native artifacts dating back over 9,000 years have been found on both sides of the border. Voyageur journals mention the presence of native encampments, and artifacts, stone tools and pottery, from all time periods have been found. Later there were rail tracks, they appear to be wooden, and pulleys were used to take supplies and logging, prospecting, and commercial fishing equipment over the portage. In the distance, you can see buildings on the American side that were primarily used by the logging companies. Prairie Portage is a very, very busy place. On most days, the quota was fulfilled. Here you can see that fiberglass canoes and Kevlar canoes have taken over, and aluminum canoes are found in relatively small numbers. Quetico Park was often ahead of the curve. Sally Pringle and Laurie McQuaig became portage crew members in 1978. They quickly showed that they could clear portages and clean campsites as well as their male cohorts. They helped pave the way for females getting jobs in Quetico Park, where previously only men were considered. Marie getting some fresh air after a busy morning in the office. Joe Meany would sometimes radio us in the evening with a riddle for Leaf and Anna to solve. They eagerly awaited his call. There were rituals we followed for using the park radio. Park stations would call in every morning at 8 o'clock with their weather info, temperature, humidity, 24-hour rainfall. And we'd all wait for Wilbur and Bernice Hyatt, the longest serving rangers, to call in from cabin 16. We never had to wait long. Wilbur always was on the air at precisely 8 o'clock. Customs agent Al Mackenzie had worked at Prairie Portage for many years and was a source of information on Prairie Portage, its history, the hydropower generator that frequently needed tinkering, the complexities of the newly installed composting toilets, and many other items at Prairie Portage that set it apart from other ranger stations. What a great place for kids. A rocky shore complete with a sand gravel beach, two docks to play on and to fish off of, a large lawn to run around on, new friendly people to talk to every day, and a customs man and his wife next door, who seemed to have a never-ending supply of treats. The front of the ranger station was a mowed lawn with lots of room to run around and play soccer. There were quite often long lines waiting for permits, and sometimes adults, especially younger canoeists, would join in kicking the ball around. Anna loved to paddle around on her raft, wearing her super buoyant, oversized life vest. Leaf loved to catch crayfish using his bug net. Some are probably caught and released many times, sometimes on the same day, sometimes in different years. Either Marie or I could take time to go for a short paddle in the afternoon or evening with Leif and Anna. Here we are checking out an abandoned beaver house in the narrows between Inlet Bay and Bailey Bay. Both Leif and Anna spent their preschool summers in Quetico Park. Leif's first 2 summers were just him, but for their other preschool and school years, it was primarily just the two of them. However, we had a fair number of visitors, and many of them had young children. We encouraged Leif and Anna to talk with canoeists who approached them, and to play with kids if that was okay with their parents or with the people they were with. We didn't follow any fixed routine regarding education, but relied on the library books they received every 2 weeks, and on looking for and explaining things that were recurring around us, like watching a dragonfly nymph metamorphose into an adult dragonfly, the first photo, or showing them how a female crayfish carries the eggs beneath her lower abdomen to protect them from predators. The continuous flow of people through Prairie Portage meant that there were ducks that hung around looking for handouts, and they would sometimes accompany anyone going for a swim. Anna sent this drawing, complete with ducks, washing machine and communication tower, to her good friend Shirley Peruniak. My dad and Anna fishing off the Canada Customs dock. Due to the current from the river, it was the best fishing spot at Prairie Portage. Missy and Mindy Latterell would occasionally come across from the American side to fish for walleyes and visit with Al Mackenzie. We ate a lot of freshly caught fish. Here Leif and his friend Joseph display the afternoon's catch. Our canoe trips at Prairie Portage were very limited. I was able to take Leif and Anna on a trip to Agnes Lake with our friend Andy Hill. Here is Leif at the top of Louisa Falls. During one 24-hour period at Prairie, our rain gauge showed we had over 6 inches of rain. Ducks were swimming in the front yard, and we had to bail the boat out to keep it from sinking at the dock. The remnants of an old logging dam at the outlet of Knife Lake burst, and water levels downstream, including Basswood Lake, rose dramatically. We had a short but dramatic downfall of hail one midsummer's day. Photo shows a buildup of hail on the ground at Latterell's boat landing across on the U.S. side. Every ranger station we were at had interesting people to talk to and learn from. Marie grew up in Winton, just a few blocks from John Sandstead and his wife Vi. Her parents were good friends with the Sandsteads, and she had known him from when she was a little girl. John was a guide, trapper, and in his later years, maintenance man at the Ely Outward Bound School. He loved to tell entertaining stories about his decades of guiding and trapping to Marie and I when he came over in the evening, and during the day he would often tell stories about wolves, he really disliked wolves, and interesting tales about bears and beaver to Leif and Anna when he was fishing on the customs dock. Leif and Anna also got to meet Dorothy Moulter, the root beer lady, and drink some of her homemade root beer. Packing up to leave at the end of the summer, like Marie is doing here at Cache Bay, is always difficult. But preparing to leave after our last summer in the park was the most difficult of all. It was a tough, agonizing decision to make, but we were leaving our dream job and moving on to another phase of our lives. We had a lot of great experiences and made many new friends on both sides of the border. Leif and Anna had to miss the beginning and end of a few of their early school years. Their education, however, had continued on, but on a different learning path. Our summers at Prairie Portage were both a sunset and a sunrise. We were completing one portion of our lives and beginning a new one. The sun was setting on our time as park rangers, and we had decided we needed more education. We moved to Thunder Bay, and Marie went to Teachers College in Thunder Bay in the fall of 1985. We then moved to Peterborough, where I went to graduate school in anthropology. We continued to come back to Prairie for the summers, with 1987 being our last summer. We were both successful in meeting our educational goals and went on to teach in Thunder Bay for many, many years. I was also able to conduct 5 summers of archaeological research in the park. Leif and Anna completed grade school, and then high school, university, and grad school. Both are now married and have children of their own. Life goes on. There are many people to thank, and a large number of them have passed away. Many named were particularly helpful in our first few years as park rangers, when assistance, encouragement, and advice were needed the most. The following individuals quickly come to mind, and I undoubtedly have forgotten many, many more. Fergie Wilson, Mary McKay, Shirley Pruniak, Dave Elder, Gary Parker, Wayne Burke, Joe and Vera Meany, Webb and Bernice Hyatt, Mike and Chris O'Brien, George Holborn, Glenn Nolan, Gary Frechette, Janice Matichuk, Frank Burrows, Lauren Morrow, Hilary Petrus, Dan Robinson, and Sam Matichuk. I also want to thank friends in Atikokan who made our life outside of Quetico Park easy and enjoyable. They include Tom and Bettina Miata, Dick and Judy Heiner, Don and Liz Mackay, Don and Louise Latachowski, Paul and Judy Warren, Mike and Jan Lewis, Jim and Pam Clark, Bud and Sandra Dixon, Bill and Dorothy Lawson, Don Meany, and of course many others. Of course, I have to thank Leif and Anna for simply being themselves in the video, and more importantly, for being who they are today. Thanks to Marin, Luke, Penny, and Corinne for being ghosts of the future yet to come. And finally, thanks to Heather and Jamie for being wonderful people, incredible parents, and for being kind and loving to an old man. Marie was my inspiration for this video about our family life as Quetico Park Rangers. She passed away in 2013, so I couldn't benefit from her great memory and thoughts about our Quetico Park summers. This video would have been more complete and way more insightful with her recollections of our joys and the complexities of our summers at Beaver House, Cache Bay, and Prairie Portage. I did my best. I really hope you enjoyed it.